Welcome to Insider's Playbook, where I get practical tips from coaches, pros, and fellow players who've been there. I'm your host, Mike Rogers, a senior player still grinding my way through leagues and tournaments. Today's guest is Stephen Bourne, founder of 1 Minute Tennis and a former professional whose students span every generation, from juniors just picking up a racket, WTA professionals to international level seniors, even a client well into his 90s. Stephen's 1 Minute Tennis YouTube channel was the fastest growing tennis channel in 2023, reaching players worldwide with concise, high impact lessons. He's also the author of many books that dive deep into stroke technique, showing how clear language and feel based learning can unlock progress for anyone at any age. Stephen, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
Well, Stephen, I just want to start off with something that really stood out in your background. You're working with everyone from juniors, touring pros, and even a player in his 90s, and that's an incredible range. When you're working with those very different athletes, how do you approach teaching the same game in such different ways?
That's a great question. First of all individuals are really different. So when you're working with high-level performance children, that's actually almost like working with adults, very small adults, but it's not so different because those children will have had one-to-one adult-junior relationships for thousands of hours by the time I actually get to meet with them. So in a small area, then it's actually very similar to working with adults. But then also you have obviously children who are new to the game. And that always, even when I had my own tennis academy, I had an academy in Spain for 17 years. And we had many, many high-level players, both high-level juniors and high-level seniors. And I've always loved working, as well as with the higher-level ranked players, with normal recreational players or beginners. So I used to take, as the tennis director, quite a few beginner junior groups, simply because I love the instant feedback, the instant improvement. If you've got a professional player, then you work, 100 hours and you get a tiny improvement and they're happy. But you get a beginner and you work for 45 minutes and it's like, whoa, I can write. That feedback, for me, is more rewarding than the pro player. So although this works broadly across the range, with the small children, I work on a system of play to learn, don't learn to play. What do I mean by that? Is everybody enjoys learning to play something. The reason that football is enormously popular, both American football and the rest of the world's football, is that you play to learn it. The reason the violin is somewhat less popular is that you learn to play it. Most people teach tennis by learning to play it. And this is a big mistake with small children. With small children, you have to create environments where you play to learn. I'll give you an example, a practical example. So I take, say, a 6, 7-year-old boy or girl. They can't hit the ball. And their attention will be here and there and everywhere. So if I'm on a clay court, I'll draw a tic-tac-toe board on the ground. And I'll explain to them that if they hit the ball 3 times in a row, they get to put a cross in. And if they miss, I get to put a nought in. And now we're trying to play tic-tac-toe, and we're playing to learn tennis because they're playing tic-tac-toe. I don't want it to be too long in this answer, but I'll then reverse engineer the psychology because that small child will probably have great parents and great teachers. And every time they've done well, they'll be told, oh, well done. And every time they've done badly, they'll be told, go on, try harder, you can do better. But what I'll do is if they miss the ball, I'll say, yes, fantastic, you've lost. And I'll put my nought in. And every time they do well, 3 hits, I'll say, well done. And they'll put their cross in. So we have a reverse engineered psychology. This is interesting if you're 8 or 6 or 7, because now this crazy person is behaving differently. So we're playing to learn in many different ways. And after 5 minutes, they don't have to hit the ball, they have to hit the middle. And after 5 minutes, they have to get the ball over the net. And after 5 minutes, they have to get the ball over the net and catch the racket 3 times. And we add layer upon layer and continue to play to learn. This can apply at every level with young players. So, for example, I was working with a little girl. She's in a couple of the videos, Sophie. She's from Germany. She won the Stuttgart Grand Prix in her age group this year. And so she's probably the number one under 12 in Europe. So very advanced super player. And we're working on the split step because, like a lot of young players, she can't see the point in the split step because she can actually destroy most of the players she plays against by just merely jumping, walking to the ball and hammering it into the corners. But we need to develop a movement. So let's make another game. I was in Italy, so we made a game with the gladiators, right? The Roman gladiators are pretty well known to everybody. And when the gladiators won or lost a battle, somebody might live and somebody might die because the emperor would give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So I had her mother at the back of the court. I would rally with the little girl, and then win or lose the rally, the mother would give a thumbs up or a thumbs down as to whether she'd made a split step in between every single stroke. If she'd won the rally and she got a thumbs up, then she got the point. If she'd won the rally and got a thumbs down, I got 2 points, right? So we played the gladiator game. So everything with young people wants to be based around play to learn, don't learn to play. Learning to play is boring. Playing to learn is fun and exciting. This is not so difficult to do. So with older players, what tends to happen is that they want to know why. The why is not very important when you're 8, but the why is very important when you're maybe a senior player or maybe to yourself. So I'll give you an example of a different situation for an older player. I put this in a video quite recently. So Yannick Sinner, for example, I got this data off 3 separate American universities, so it's pretty precise. So as he takes the racket back on the forehand, at this stage, his hand is traveling at 8 miles per hour. When he drops into the slot position, going into the racket lag, his hand is traveling at 5 miles per hour. And he then accelerates forwards at 88 miles per hour. Up until that point, by the way, I could keep up with him. But the acceleration at 88 miles per hour, I'm a little bit behind these days, or any day.
You and me both.
So 8 miles per hour, 5 miles per hour, 88 miles per hour. And we've got one of the greatest forehands that there's ever been, maybe the greatest. Here's a question. Why? Why bother with this and this and this when he could just go there just as easily? But the reality is that the way that these strokes are created is with a loading phase, an acceleration phase, and then a deceleration phase. So when I make this movement and drop, I've loaded all of the large muscles of the body. My pectoral muscles, my rhomboid muscles in my back, my deltoids are all loaded, ready to recoil into the acceleration phase. If I just take the racket back to here and ignore this very slow movement into here, then I haven't loaded the body. And so now this movement here will be from my bicep, whereas when I load here, my bicep is actually neutral and it's the whole body throwing the arm forwards. This explanation, this why, is relevant to older players. Most people, as they understand the why, then they'll apply it into their game. So with younger players, I work entirely on the fact that they don't need to know the why, but they do need to play to learn. And everything has to be based around fun. It can also be very competitive. An example of this would be practicing serve. So with both, you can actually, there are also cross platforms which apply to all age groups. So let's now do a play to learn that would apply to you and will apply to the best senior players in the world and will apply to juniors. And that's a game I created called Perfect 15. So and I did a little experiment with this a few years ago. When my tennis academy was at its peak, I had 11 world-class juniors working on the basis they were on the ITF Tour or the Tennis Europe Tour, similar to Orange Bowl in the States. And in the off-season, where there was a 2-month break from tournaments, I had 6 of them practicing serve for 300 serves every day. Now, I don't know whether you've ever done 300 serves every day, but it's immensely boring. So very quickly, they're going through the routines. You can imagine it, yeah? And I had 5 of them playing a game that I made. And when we came to the tournaments, the players who played the game for about 5-10 minutes a day were massively better under pressure than the players who actually engaged in the 300 serves every day. And this game applies at every level. I've done it with all 80s. I've done it with the WTA 162. She visited me last year twice. And we played the game with her. It improved the serve under pressure just the same. So the game is very simple. We have a look at where, if you hit your best serve and it goes in, let's have a look at the second bounce. Now, in my case, I'm still serving not too badly. So the second bounce of my serve is about 1.2 meters, about 4 feet up the back fence. That's the best I can do. John Isner's is probably,
Pretty
I don't
good.
know, half a mile up the back fence. But we see where the second bounce, where the best second bounce is. Okay, and now we start to make targets. So let's say I've got a client, let's say I'm teaching a, 45-year-old lady, and she's fairly new to tennis. So the second bounce for her, a really good one, will be just past the baseline. So now we can start to compete against each other. We have 5 serves each. If the ball is out, it's 0. If the ball is in, you score 1. If the ball is in and the second bounce is within 1 meter of your best serve, you get 2. If the ball is in and the second bounce is at or above what seems to be your best serve, you score 3. And so now, in theory, you can score 15. I've never scored 15 in my life with a realistic target. 10 is an awesome score. But what you do now is, first of all, you're playing to learn. And secondly, many coaches I hear saying to players of young and old that you must take the relaxation of practice and bring it into match play. I believe this is utter nonsense. There's no relaxation on Federer or Novak or Yannick's face when they're playing the biggest matches in the world. What they've done is they've learned to handle pressure better than the rest of the world. And the only way you can do that is to bring pressure from the match court into the practice. And playing perfect 15 feels exactly like a match, whereas practicing 300 serves a day is actually not that useful, except for building some stroke mechanics. It's not going to do that much when you're next at 3-4, 30, 40 serving. So there's an example where they cross over between play to learn to play, and the why and the mechanics of the strokes. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's sort of the
Oh,
basic
totally.
that I try to work on when working with these vastly different ages.
Besides the fact that at my age, if I tried to serve 300 serves in practice, I would have to take a week off.
Yeah, I know the feeling. So I'll share, if I may. You mentioned in the intro we work with much older players. I'm in awe of the oldest player I've ever worked with. It's a lady from a tiny country or principality in Europe called Liechtenstein, and she's called Femietta Tundri, and she's 93. And
Wow.
the woman is amazing. She plays golf 3 times a week and tennis 3 times a week, still driving everywhere. And her mindset is unbelievable. And this is a little story. I've got many, but I'll give you one story that fills you into the mindset. I was teaching a young man, Tigran. He's about 8 years old. He's from Armenia. And so she came past one day, and people from Liechtenstein, they all speak 3 or 4 languages. They'll speak German, French, and English automatically, because it's like in between everywhere. So I said to her, Fanyeta, do you speak Russian? She said, is he Russian? I said, Armenian. He speaks Russian and Armenian. I'm having to communicate everything by body language. She said, yet, I don't speak Russian. And then she went over and had a very long conversation with him, okay? A really long one. And then she's leaving and she said, okay, Steve, I'll see you tomorrow. And I said, wait a minute. You said you don't speak Russian. She said, I don't. I'm learning. I have 3 classes a week, but it's not an easy language. And I just thought,
Wow.
you are my hero. You're 93,
Right.
learning Russian for fun. That woman does not believe she's old, and she never will be.
She's
So I don't
my
know.
hero just for being on the court at 93, let
Yeah,
alone
I
everything
know.
else she's doing. So
Yeah, but it gives a little bit of a reason as to why. So yeah, I could expand more, but does that give you some insight onto the different approaches to the different players and age groups?
Yes, yes, that's really good. If you had one piece of advice that you could give to like coaches who want to work more effectively, say with senior players, since you have that play play to
Learn to
learn
play. Yeah.
for juniors, how would you approach that with seniors?
I give them when at the peak of its performance in my academy before COVID, we had 9 full-time coaches and 6 part-time coaches. So I worked with a lot of trainers, and some were good, some were bad. Inevitably, with any team that you look to run and develop, but the one
Hmm.
common denominator of tennis coaches all over the world is their ambition seems to be to get a young player and to work with them to help them to become professional. And in the meantime, I'll work a bit with the old guys. Okay. My ambition is, my passion is to get the young guys, but the old people, yeah, I'll do lessons with them, but it doesn't really matter.
Mm,
And what they've got to understand is it really does matter,
yeah.
right? The dedication of time and effort that you put into your tennis, right, it takes away a lot from the rest of your life. And it really does matter to senior players. So when the coaches understand that it does matter, then it's their attitude will change. And I really do believe it's about that attitude. For myself, I try to be a nice guy, but I wasn't the easiest person to work for. And I used to pick a coach every week and go through their agenda and pick a senior
Uh-huh.
lesson, not a junior lesson. And I'd ask a very simple question. What did that guy learn in that lesson? And nearly
Hmm.
always the answer I got was absolute nonsense, had no relation to reality. But what I would then do is call the player and ask them if they did learn it in the lesson. Very quickly, the trainers learned that they had to actually teach in that lesson with the senior player. So many lessons with
Hmm.
tennis coaches, in my experience, with senior players are a good hit and a bit of a conversation, but with no real structured teaching taking place. And then they'll take a junior player and they'll be working endlessly on the kick serve or the spin or the slice or whatever. And they're really trying to teach. So that would be
Mm,
my one sort of one overriding desire is to make sure that the tennis trainer realizes that this is not just a fill-in lesson. This is something that's really important, sometimes more important than anything else in that person's week or life. And they've got to address it that way. I don't know whether your experience has been the same as that, but that overriding has been mine.
I was going to say I have experienced that, and so whenever I'm looking to work with a coach, it's what's their experience working with senior players, and you can't overhaul a swing at this age. I don't think so. It's like what corrections can we make, to make it a better working with what you got, so to speak.
It does. I agree with you. It does depend on the player. I work with Roland Ulrich, who's one of the highest ranked plus 60s in Germany. And Roland, when I met him, very strong game. Very obviously, his ranking is very high. And great certain volley game. But his forehand was barely past continental, and he was always prone to slicing it. But his determination, you see, if I'd have set a glass ceiling over his ambition by saying we're not going to rebuild the stroke at up over 60, I would have been wrong
Mm,
because Roland works now. He's working for over a year on a ball machine, maybe 1 hour to 1.5 hours of forehands. He's worked as well on other things, but he's done 1.5 hours of forehands, and he now has a semi-western, vicious topspin forehand and a very, very aggressive stroke and a very reliable stroke. So I agree with you. For most people,
yeah.
it's that we're not going to totally reinvent the wheel, but there will be some exceptions. In what I do, working both online and on court with senior players now, first thing I want to know is about their practice circumstances and their ambition. Because without knowing those two, you
Right.
either can push too hard and make it depressing, or you can also not respect the ambition and the character of that person. So I agree with you to generally, you're right, but we also have to work with these exceptionally driven people. I don't know whether you've encountered that, but
Yeah, no, I
that
agree completely because you have some, older players. They're maybe playing leagues or social tennis. They don't have that ambition. Somebody like me, I'm going for a gold ball at some point in my life, hopefully. So I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make the changes that's going to get me to that next level to compete. So and
yeah,
and so
it's
it does definitely depend on the person and what they're looking for.
yeah, it's then this sort of the fact finding at the beginning
Hmm.
is really important. It's really important, and it is actually it's that's one of the differences. You mentioned, or the question at the beginning was the difference between training younger players and older players. With the younger players, very often the ambition is from the parent. Now, it has to be. The most extreme example of that was a great, a great family. But a family came to see me from Kazakhstan, and they got two beautiful girls. I think they were 5 and 8. Um, Amelia and I can't remember the name of the other one. It'll come back to me. And the father, through a translator, explained to me that they wanted a program to take his daughters to professional level, and that I needed to understand at this stage that top 10 would be considered a failure.
Mm.
Right. That's a true story. So they're not always, tennis players are not always the most reasonable people to deal with.
No.
But yeah, top 10 would be considered a failure for both of them. And but with the children, very often the ambition is through the parents.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean, and that's probably the case in all of them. I mean, Yannick Sinner, surely when he was 6, did he really see all the training he was going to do? It's
Right.
only with a parental support and the building of a team that you actually can then continue that training. There is a difference also in motivation.
Hmm.
Senior players tend to stay motivated. You've decided as an adult to commit your time and effort into tennis. So we need to take care of the body and check for injuries and make sure that you can realize your ambition as far as possible. With younger players, the dropout rate of young players of a high level is higher in tennis than
Mm.
any other sport in the world by miles. It's about 70%. So
Wow.
in basketball, it's about 20%. In football, maybe 15, 20%. Tennis, 70%. I've got to say, the dropout rate of my young players, when I learned a little bit more about it, was almost zero. And the reason
Wow.
that that occurred is, first of all, we've got to look at why it happens and then look at how to deal with it. And the first thing is, I think it's the car journey home from tournaments, because tennis is one of the toughest sports in the world. You don't know how long the match is going to last. There's no timeout and there's no draws. So if you've got 32 Roger Federers in the tournament, you've got 31 losers, and
Mm.
yet there might be Roger Federer. So it's the toughest sport.
Yeah.
Um, so the player plays. They've had to travel probably 1 or 2 hours in a car with their parents to play the tournament. So now they've lost. They shower and change. They're mentally and physically exhausted because they didn't know how long the match was going to last, but they knew they were going to win or lose. They get in the back of the car and they're trapped. And now it starts. And with very few exceptions, the beginning of that journey starts in two ways: 20 minutes of silence. This is horrible. And then the phrase, I don't mind you losing. It's when you don't play your best.
Right.
And now the child is trapped. And there's a 1.5 hour journey with a mentally and physically exhausted person who just wants to scream and get out.
Hmm.
And after long enough, they quit. So I thought, if that's the problem, and that's how I viewed the problem, then let's look at the solution. So when I agreed with that person from Kazakhstan to train his daughters with the interpreter, we made a pact. And the pact, if they broke it, I would never, ever work with them or their children again. And I really stuck to that. I gave away some very, very well-paying clients, right, because I couldn't break the pact. The pact was very simple. If at the end of a match, the young player said yes to 2 questions, then nobody could talk about the match for 24 hours.
Mm.
Now, a reasonable question is, what are the 2 questions? Our responsibility when we're teaching is not to just teach tennis, it's to build character and to build champions in every part of life. So the 2 questions were very simple. Did you fight for every point? And did you behave with dignity?
Mm.
So what more can you do
Right.
to develop a young player than have them fight for every point and still retain their dignity? One time they give up, one time they swear, one time they throw the racket, then that's it, all bets are off.
Mm.
But the pressure is then on the parent and on the player, and the coach has to be manipulating in there. And so it becomes a partnership. And that's a very different scenario to working with a senior player where we can work on one-to-one because you're taking all of those roles. So it's
Right.
significantly different in that way. But it also means that as a young player develops, the dropout rate, in my case, went down to almost zero. Which was obviously hugely rewarding, but, in every way. I don't know if you've come across that or thought of it that way before, but that was my experience.
Well, I'd hate to let you in on some of the conversations I've had with myself after some matches, but
Yes, well, everybody's had that feeling. I sometimes you can almost parody this. And the worst loss of Roger Federer's career was when he lost the Wimbledon final at the age of 38. He beat Nadal in the semi-final. He has 3 match points against Novak and loses. Just imagine if, as he's walking off the court, pardon me, that Stefan Edberg puts a friendly arm over his shoulder and says, Roger, now let's talk about those match points, because on one of them you didn't keep your head down, on one of them you didn't follow through. I mean, the idea is ridiculous.
right.
And
Well, Stephen, you share some great insights and some great stories. And, what I'd like to do is, some players might want to get in touch with you. What's the best way to get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing?
truly just look for 1 minute tennis. One of the things, 1 minute tennis is not based around the fact that we do 1 minute lessons. We do short lessons to the point, but it's actually based on a training program, a management training program initially that turned into a sports training program called the 1 Minute Manager from the 80s and 90s. And everything that is based on is that real interaction, real emotional exchange, real training, real learning all takes place in a very, very short space of time. And if you look for 1 minute tennis at almost any platform, then you'll find us. 1 minute tennis at Gmail, 1 minute tennis at YouTube, at TikTok, wherever. You just enter 1 minute tennis. And if I can help anybody with their tennis games in any way, then it would be a pleasure.
Fantastic. Well, I'll also have links in the show notes, so they'll be able to get a hold of you. And I want to thank you again for joining me on Insider's Playbook.
It's really my pleasure. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you.